We now go to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the ranking member as well. I thank the witnesses for appearing. Mr. Woodall, you have raised questions about SIFIs and how they can be delisted. Is your question, how can a specific entity, company, corporation be delisted, or is there a means by which you can have a standardized methodology in place for delisting?
Well, so far we've just talked about the individual SIFIs. And I think in that case, what I was saying, that these individual companies don't have a roadmap as to how to get off. Now, there's one that we've talked about, the insurance companies, but GE Capital is the fourth SIFI that was designated. And as you probably know, it's public information. They're in the process of getting rid of all their financial activities and probably will lose their SIFI identity. But I'm not sure that insurance companies are in a position to do the nuclear option and get rid of all their financial business in order not to be a SIFI. Now, as far as the group, I think that's what we're looking at with asset managers.
Let me do this, because I'd like for Mr. Sullivan to respond. I'm interested in hearing his take on it. Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Woodall makes the point that because of the nature of the business of insurance companies, delisting becomes a bit more difficult than for a GE Capital. How do you respond to that?
Well, Representative, mine is to design the regulatory regime and architecture for firms after they are designated by the FSOC. So what I'm doing in my day job is doing just that, making sure that we put together a regulatory regime designed for firms designated by the FSOC.
So no one on this panel can address Mr. Woodall's question, then I take it?
Actually, Congressman, just to be, I think it's important to be factual in this conversation. The firms that are designated by the council, after following months of engagement with the firm, thousands of pages of analysis, hours spent with the firm by all council members, the firm designated receives several hundred pages of analysis that provide detailed and explicit statements about where the council sees risk or threats to financial stability in the firm. So the firm does have a very clear sense of the basis for the council's determination.
I understand, but Mr. Woodall seems to be asking another question, not what is it that caused the company to become a SIFI. He seems to be asking what can be done so that the company can no longer be a SIFI.
That's the difference. That's the next point from
Mr. Woodall, now you got to let me have a minute here now. My time is very limited. So how do you address his question? I think he raises a good question, and I'd like to hear a good answer.
The council has an annual review process for firms that have been designated. So each year, and that process was enhanced this year based on stakeholder and public comment and comments from members of Congress as well. So each firm designated has an opportunity to come to the council, provide information about how it's changed its approach over the course of the year. And throughout the year, the council and its staff and members who serve on the council have an open door policy whereby a firm designated can come in at any time, share any information, and provide any insight they'd like to.
I see. Well, let me just make this comment. It seems to me that we're talking about something similar to strict liability. As you know, we have negligence and intentional torts. But you can also be liable just because of the inherent nature of what you do. And I think Mr. Woodall is getting to this point. He doesn't believe that insurance companies are inherently dangerous to the extent that they become SIFIs and they're never going to cease to be SIFIs. So the question becomes, and I'm going to visit more with people about this, just curious now because of the way he raised the question. How do they have, we're new in this, we're in our infancy. All of this is fledgling in a sense. And given that we're in our nascency, these kinds of questions do have to be answered. And perhaps with more opportunities, we'll get some answers. But I'm still curious about Mr. Woodall's question of moving from designation to no longer being listed, or de-risking is the case with GE Capital. But thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, you've allowed me 11 seconds more than I deserve. I yield back.
Always glad to accommodate the gentleman from Texas with his wonderful insights to have a couple extra moments. Thank you, Mr. Green from Texas. With that,